appearances, we have one, Del Underbaki. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. This afternoon, I'm sharing my concerns about the Holzman Road proposal involving the relocation and potential expansion of segregated special education programs serving 1st through 8th grade learners. After reviewing last year's notes and videos of work group sessions, I found fiscal conversations about underutilized district-owned space and rental and leasing concerns. I remember efficiency rationale for consolidating high-needs programs in close proximity to family support services. I found administrative requests for more spaces to address waiting lists of vulnerable learners. I could not find conversations about the progress of students enrolled in alternative programs. I could not find any parent testimony celebrating progress outcomes for their children. Recent reporting documents assumptions these programs provide environments where students can thrive and develop as learners, focus on returning students to neighborhood schools, and are showing positive potential. I am not aware of any PI 25 accountability data supporting these assumptions. Terms like efficiency, finding space, and providing environments need to set off accountability alarms in our discussions. I feel these terms reinforce a segregated brick-and-mortar mindset that prioritizes the provision of places over investment in evidence-based intervention. Integrative intervention calls for outreach to cultivate meaningful learning engagement. In 2014, the Office of Special Education Programs announced a shift in the monitoring of special education programs. College and community-ready IEPs need to focus on early intervention, starting at the age of 3 through 21. These reforms require school systems to abandon the emphasis on compliance and replace with a commitment to results-driven accountability. I am unaware of any results-driven research that encourages segregated learning environments for PI 25 learners. I believe the Holzman proposal only serves to reinforce a flawed brick-and-mortar mindset. In order to release ourselves from this mindset, we need to tear down our systemic silos blocking meaningful PI 25 reform. Tear down our silo of instruction, which disregards CCR IEP guidance and prioritizes academic, GPA, and graduation rate metrics. Tear down our silo of professional development, which blocks evidence-based intervention from reaching our most vulnerable learners. Tear down our silos of accountability, which are shrouding the transparency of PI 25 outcomes. When a brick-and-mortar option cannot provide a student with their least restrictive environment, we need to resist segregation and embrace evidence-based wraparound outreach for our PI 25 learners. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next item on the agenda is a brief announcement or update on the Superintendent Search. Tomorrow, December 10th, we will be meeting in closed session where our consultants will come in to give us a rundown of the 31 applicants. They won't go into detail on all the 31. They are going to move through and give us the names of the 31 applicants. They will be referring about 6 to 7 applicants to the board to narrow the search. However, the board can look at the other applicants on the list they are not referring to us and ask questions, and really the board can decide at that point. But they will be, based on their experience, be referring about 6 to 7 applicants to us. We will narrow our search, and then we will do our interviews on December 17th and 18th. These interviews will all be done in closed session, and after those interviews we will be narrowing our search to 2 to 3. Once we narrow our search to 2 to 3, they will be public. And so, Nikki, did you have a question?
Yeah, on the candidates, is there a way we can at least read the materials like a few hours before the meeting or tonight, just so we can be prepared?
Yes, definitely. Tomorrow in closed session, we will be talking about more of the process, and the board can provide input on interview questions and just process in general in the interview process. And then definitely get materials beforehand. So, yeah, we can talk about it more in closed session tomorrow.
How many applications we had total?
31.
And then they're recommending us how many?
About 6 to 7.
6 to 7. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
6 to 7. Yep. Yep. Any other questions? All right, we're moving along. Go ahead, Ali.
Can I ask, in terms of scheduling folks for kind of initial, in terms of scheduling folks, are we doing that tomorrow? Are we looking at that tomorrow?
So we will be doing interviews the 17th and the 18th.
And we'll be notifying and scheduling those?
Immediately. Yep.
Immediately after tomorrow night?
Immediately after
Okay.
tomorrow night.
Thank you.
Yep. The logistics of process and questions, we'll all talk about that tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Yep.
What would happen, and I think I appreciate that we actually having a little bit of the discussion in public, because I think it's important that the extent possible we
Yes.
We have a public conversation. What would happen if out of the 6 to 7 we don't feel good about that pool, and then we decide to draw from the 31? And what if, even though we're drawing from the 31, we still don't feel like we have a good enough number of pool to make that selection? What would happen?
So if we don't have a good enough pool from the 31, then I think that is a conversation we'll have with our consultants and provide some guidance on options of reopening the position or extending the deadline a little more. And really the board will guide that discussion and guide our consultants. Ultimately, we want to make sure that we get this right. So if the board is not comfortable with the 31 applicants, then we will discuss that as a board tomorrow and provide some guidance to our consultants.
Thank you.
Yeah, but good question. Hopefully we won't. Hopefully we have our consultant in there. So, okay. All right. So next item on the agenda is the proposed purchase of property located at 2436 Regent Street. This is going to be a discussion for us to answer any of our questions. And we won't be voting on this tonight. We'll be voting on this next week.
All right, thank you. All right, so thank you for having us tonight. In front of you are actually two separate, not related property purchase discussions. Chad and I will take on the first one, which is a small property on the corner of West High School at Regent and Speedway. It's a small monument company that if you're sitting at a very busy intersection and you look to your right, you'll see a small building. That building is on a footprint of what is West High School, and the district has been kind of eyeing up that building for well over a decade before Chad and I have even been in our seats as a potential purchase. West High School is not only our largest high school, it's one of the largest high schools in the state. And that school sits up on one of the smallest footprints in our city. And if you were to take a kind of student ratio to the amount of space that they have, I think you would find it's towards the bottom at the state. So the idea of gaining any piece of land for West High School, who's very landlocked right now, is obviously an opportunity we would want to take in front of you for consideration. Up until now, the seller has not been overly interested in selling to us, but due to some circumstances in the seller's kind of life and with that building, the seller has approached us to ask if we would be interested in potentially purchasing the building. After some negotiations, his asking lowest price for consideration is $300,000. So if we were to purchase that small piece of land, that would be kind of the price. The board does have funds set aside in the budget under a building purchases line item already in the budget, which I'll talk more about in a little bit or can answer more questions. So the funds are there. Those funds are one-time money coming from a TID closure from early 2018. So at TID, when it closes, we usually get a little bit of a payoff return on that particular tax increment district investment. In this case, 3 TIDs closed around the same time in early 2018. And when that happened, the board at the time asked us to keep that money in reserve for a potential building purchase. We'll talk more about that attached to the second purchase, but the vision of purchasing this $300,000 building is tied into that same funding source, a one-time funding source that can be only used on one-time investments, often used for things like roofs or paving a parking lot. And in this case, when it came to just under $5 million, the board wanted to do something that kind of was a bigger investment that would ultimately help move the district and its goals forward. So they asked us to set it aside. We think this is an opportunity for the board to consider to use those funds. So from a financial perspective, I'm thinking it's a pretty good investment for the needs of West High School.
I would agree. Nice summary, Kelly. The only thing I would add, certainly, if folks could ask questions around future use. At this point, we don't have anything specifically targeted for what that property might be used for. As you may know, right now on a daily basis, we can only park about a quarter of the staff members who drive to a site that's incredibly difficult to park at, or may drive to a site that's really difficult to park at. If the referendum were to continue on its current path and eventually pass, that land would be available for us to potentially consider some type of expansion at West High School as well. But more than anything, it buys us the flexibility for future use down the way in terms of, as Kelly said, a site that is just incredibly landlocked and would complete the kind of the block proper at West High School. Now we'd own the entire block as a district.
So I'll wrap up with just next steps. We'll answer your questions tonight, and then it will be on the December regular board meeting in other business for your consideration. The seller has a pretty quick timeline, and in order to keep this opportunity available for us, we would want to action this month.
Okay, any questions? Ananda?
Can you explain to us the relationship with TIG, and if we don't use that money, or how much longer we have the ability to use the $300,000, and if we don't use it now, what would happen, and that sort of thing, and then how it comes from different funding. What is our limitations around using that money as well? Sure.
So we don't get tax increment district payoffs annually. TID close on a kind of scheduled timeline, so we might get one year and 4 the next, and then none for 3 years. So it's a one-time opportunity, meaning when it closes, we get a small payment out of that closure. One time means there's no other future time that revenue is coming back. So once you spent it once, it's gone. So we can't tie it. So because it's one-time money, we can only tie it to one-time expenses. So you can't tie it to staffing, because year after year you pay salary. You can't tie it to increases in salary, because year after year you pay out salary. So and student programming, year after year happens. So you can't tie one-time money to reoccurring expenses. You can only tie one-time money to one-time expenses. So my roof example would be kind of an example in this same dollar amount range. You would otherwise potentially fund one roof project, for example. As our budget works, the board, through the budgeting process going into this year, or budgeting process in 18-19 and the budgeting process going into this year, chose to put the money in a building purchases budget line item. At this point, you would either have to use it to buy a building, or you would need a majority vote to change the budget to spend it on something else, because you've already put it in kind of a building purchases line. If it was not spent this year, it would fall to fund balance. That's what happened in 18-19, because we didn't get the purchase done at that time. So it would fall to fund balance, and then it would be up to the board to either, rebudget into something else one time, like a roof, or let it sit in fund balance kind of for perpetuity. It theoretically could sit there. So we wouldn't lose it. You just have to re-budget attached to some other one-time expense for the 2021 budget year.
Any other questions? Chris?
I just wanted to build on Ananda's comment a little bit. I know that we have used TID funding in the past to fund innovations in some of our equity work, and I wondered if you could give some examples of those investments that aren't recurring investments, that are one-time equity or innovation investments.
Sure. So TID 25 in our recent past is the only other TID that paid off a substantial sum, the way kind of this had. And so that was $9 million, kind of in working with the city. And so similar, the board wanted to set aside that money for kind of bigger, more intentful projects. It was, embedded into that is a number of one-time maintenance projects. The majority of the funds go towards Chad's department coming out of TID 25, including fiber and other just infrastructure work. The innovation grant, there was one line item for $250,000, kind of out of the $9 million, that the board wanted to try some new projects. And so it was well known at that period of time that this is one-time money, and that as soon as that one-time money was spent, it was no longer available, and that the project it was tied to would no longer continue until or unless the board decided to build it into the operating budget. And that TID money runs out at the end of this year, and will be a conversation we have kind of moving into the 2021. So it was a very small portion of the TID closing that the board at the time wanted to try, like a pilot program. And it was well known that it was one-time money that would in fact run out, and that the people who were tied into there knew very well that they were not on a contract that would continue with this program. But that they would go back to being kind of traditional teachers in traditional classrooms if and when the program ended.
Okay. Any other questions? Ollie?
So I'm curious as to how you all, thank you, Jane. I'm curious as to how you all got to 300,000, because I know there was a little bit of back and forth, and that seems like you all negotiated pretty intensively to get us to that number. So how did we land there?
Yeah, so I guess to start, the property itself has a conditional use, so it can only be used in the eyes of the city for the purpose it has as a monument company. So the future owner of that property was likely either another monument company or the school district. So this turned into kind of a one-on-one negotiation with the property owner. We gave him an initial offer that he rejected, didn't hang up the phone, but did reject. I think he's in a position that if he doesn't get this price, then he would turn to another monument company. I think he's owned this 6 or 7 years now, and it is in an ideal location to run a monument company. And I believe he's in the position that he would start negotiating to have another monument company of some sort take over the property. So we got to a spot that was kind of his bottom line offer said, don't call me again, this is it. So that's how we ended up with this price to bring in front of you.
And then the structure itself is uniquely positioned on what's considered a somewhat chaotic intersection. And I know there's some potential to resolve that to both the benefits of the overall greater community, but also to our students. And so I was hoping you all could speak to that.
Yeah, so we've actually had an email this morning with the city regarding this potential land purchase. So any future improvements to the site, we would work closely with the city planners, traffic engineering, to make sure that whatever we ended up doing with the site made the intersection safer. It may mean at some point some type of shared use agreement, or even the city asking us to sell them or give them rights to a chunk of that corner. Who knows what they come up with, maybe a right turn lane or something, because that is kind of a crazy, chaotic intersection. But it would be certainly it would be important to us to make sure that whatever improvement ended up there would be safe. So we'd make sure we worked with the city planners accordingly and took the appropriate precautions and involved the certain. I think it would probably be a civil engineering exercise to make sure that it's safe for both foot traffic. If it ended up actually having some type of structure there, that would be important to us as well.
Thank you.
Great, so that was my question about safety in that intersection, so I appreciate you really beginning the discussions with city officials around this intersection. And just to add on to Ollie's question was the timeline of, once, if we acquire this property, what the timeline will be, and just looking into the perspective of safety, how soon, really having the discussions with the city of how soon we can make sure that traffic engineering is out there and can sort of facilitate the timeliness of making that intersection safe.
Yeah, so there would certainly be a period of time that would just be a real estate transaction. So you're giving us permission to move forward with an offer on the property, and then we'd have all of kind of the legalese that would happen behind the scenes for us to eventually own it. My guess would be that would take us into into next year for sure. At that point, then it becomes a planning exercise on our behalf. We would have the choice as a district to leave the property as is until we have a solid plan. We would have, if we wanted to potentially demo it and use it for something else, then anytime we have a change of use to the property, we would actually have to go through the city approval process for that change, and that's when we would immediately partner with them to make sure that whatever we're proposing kind of synced with what they had in mind for that intersection. So it could be a phased plan. We could decide there's no way the district's going to have any use for the building itself. Find money in the budget to have it demoed, and who knows, make it just an open space with more available parking. If anything, just open up that intersection so there's more visibility. And then down the road, if we ended up building something there, the city would be key as we work with them, and they would actually have to approve all the projects if we ended up doing it. So I would say, early this spring, we would probably already start discussions with the city on what's next.
And then, do you know, in having conversations with the city of what their plan was in that intersection if we didn't acquire that property? Because we did have some traffic situations there before us having this discussion, so just wondering if the city had any plans in their recent...
Yeah, we worked with the city for a crosswalk upgrade on Regent Street, a little bit further east. We've had an alder contact us and just say that's kind of a hot spot in that neighborhood in terms of folks just kind of voicing concern around the safety. So we haven't had individual conversations with the city because they really were having to come up with a solution that was essentially on city-owned streets. And I think they're hoping we'll at least be an open-minded partner as they continue to problem solve around what to do at that intersection. I'm not sure if it's lights, additional turn lanes, signage, but we'd have to work with them on what their solution would be.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Amanda?
I'm curious about any planning to future involvement of the West community around the purposing of that. I also find it to be interesting that we're like purchasing something that we still don't know exactly what we're using for. So, I know that is kind of an odd situation. I understand the complexities of the timing of this, but I'm just kind of curious about like what other thinkings have been, and I also know that without having that, it's hard to do a lot of planning. But
yeah, so yeah, exactly right. So one, this is a unique circumstance in the fact that the building essentially kind of popped into the market and kind of dropped onto our laps in terms of being a viable something for us to purchase. And I think we'll have to work with the board and the West community on what the future holds for that small plot of land. If we continue down the road of a potential referendum, that may be something we just kind of want to hold in our back pocket to give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of what's possible in terms of project work. If we were to head in the direction of not ending up on the ballot or a failed referendum, then it's an entirely different discussion with the West community and students around what the usage would be.
And when is the land, what would happen for closing, and when will the land be available to us? Well, how soon will the land be available to us if it passed in December?
We've got Andy here. Andy, what do you think in terms of a timeline on a real estate transaction like this?
We should expect 120 days to close the transaction.
After December date?
Yeah, starting at the beginning of the year was opposed to the end of April.
So
in April.
end of the spring, just to do all the paperwork on it.
And it could potentially sit until we actually know what's happening with the referendum.
It could. Yep.
Thank you.
Chris?
If we were to be working with the city to possibly do something to ameliorate traffic problems there, like that would decrease the footprint of the piece of land, like put in a right turn lane. Is this land situated in a place where the city would compensate us for taking that land for public good, or where we would just have to give it to them?
Yep, that's typically.
Because it's a very valuable little piece of land.
Amen. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's typically the way it would work. It would be, and there'd be some type of compensation or compromise in terms of them wanting property that we own, without a doubt.
Great questions.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Second up.
Move on to the next.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Second up for discussion is regarding the potential purchase of a building at 333 Holtzman Drive. I'll open us up, but I'm going to ask John, and I think,
I'll just over.
okay, and I think a staff member who will introduce themselves in just a minute, up to the table. All right. So, what you have in front of you tonight is an opportunity, and that opportunity we started to really look at as a team, kind of research and investigate, really kind of back in the 17-18 school year. So part of our challenge here is that this is a longer timeline for a process that has probably gone through 3 separate boards in overall conversation. And that conversation goes something like this. One, we have a continuum of special education supports, and as part of that, we have student programming at Olin Avenue, a spot that we lease, that we do not own. And so as it relates to providing an environment for students that is designed specifically for them, and an area we would invest in when you're leasing, it's hard for us to kind of invest in the environment that would be most appropriate for students. So as it relates to that part of the ongoing conversation for the special education continuum of supports, I'll hand it over to John and his team in just a minute. The other part of that conversation that really started back in 17-18 and has gone through the 18-19 and into the 19-20 budget is the general theme of what can we do to reduce our leased costs across the district in order to free up operating budget. And that work really started with the long-range facility plan process. So the discussion around potentially moving the programming that's at Olin Avenue into a permanent location started to live within the long-range facility plan process because it was an effort to overall kind of streamline our facilities, reduce our lease costs. It started around the same time we were talking about Nuestra Mundo, around the same time we were talking about Capitol High West and reducing lease costs. So these 2 conversations were relatively happening with a board back in 17-18 about the same time. So our work, as it went towards looking for a building, really started down the path of the long-range facility plan process. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we learned about the 3 TIDs closing at about the same period of time. That was TID 27, TID 32, and TID 43. They ended up closing in early 2018. We knew that they were going to close in 2017. At that time, we thought it was going to be about $3.5 million. So the board had even put in reserve the $3.5 million back in that budget with the idea of potentially purchasing a building to help reduce lease costs and potentially find a permanent home for some of John's programs. What ended up happening is we ended up getting just under $5 million by the time things were actually closed in 2018. So we put them all in that reserve for a potential building service at that building purchase at that board's kind of directive at the time. Chad and I then got to work once we knew what our actual dollar amount, and actually Mike Berry was in these shoes back then, but I was part of the team then. And Andy had helped us starting to kind of research what our options were that were out there. Over the course of this last year, Chad, myself, looked at over 16 properties, and we took the more viable options to John to look at and consider. Ultimately coming to kind of the Holtzman property up to you for consideration tonight, to being the property that kind of met the most needs of the program and met the financial needs, which is a viable financial investment, and a building service needs, which is a building that could largely stand on its own structurally. So kind of ticking all three of the needs of the building, we came down to Holtzman. So the only other thing I'll say before I hand it off to John or Chad to jump in is from a financial investment. Again, I mentioned this as one-time revenue sources. So it's very rare that we get this kind of dollar amount coming out of a TID closure and that we get this type of one-time money all at once. So the idea of investing in something that can open up operating funding, which is our most restricted type of funding, is a very good financial investment for us. So by purchasing a building, we free up $250,000 of John's budget, which then can be moved to direct support of students instead of a lease. We free up Chad's budget, which is currently spending operating money on a building we don't own in order to keep and maintain it. In addition to that, in Jorge's budget, we spend about $100,000 renting out various spaces for all kinds of professional development, and you'll see that in the memo in here, so I won't go in a lot of detail. That would then be saved by this particular property because it has a beautiful space that's a wide open concept now that we could use for professional learning space instead of renting different places across the city and kind of using food service via hotel, for anything that we might need. We'll be able to take that all in-house. So from a financial perspective, this is a pretty good deal. We'd be able to repay this over 14 years. The investment would pay itself off. The building itself is at least 40 years in investment. We don't pay property taxes, and we don't pay capital gains. So those are two things that work in our favor of a building purchase rather than leasing. So that from a financial perspective, I can answer more questions. That's about what I have to say at this point. I'll let it ask Chad to add anything more he might have, and then we'll hand it over to John for the program discussion.
Yeah, I guess a nice summary, Kelly. The only thing I would add is that we've been I've been to the property now, I think close to 10 times, and we've been through both with my team and had a third-party group of architects and engineers analyze the building and go through and do a thorough assessment. So we feel good about the condition of the building, the life that's left in the building, and kind of the flexibility with the open floor plan that we'd have to modify the space to kind of meet the needs of the students and build the building to make sure that we met those needs. So I think in my mind we've certainly done our homework in terms of assessing and making sure that the building's in decent shape and would be a sound purchase for the district. Kind of turn it over to John.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity. So I'm appreciative of our intensive intervention team members to my right over here, and I hope it's okay if they would come up and join for this conversation that we're going to have. You've been the recipients of board memos and briefings on the topic, but I don't know if you've really heard from some of the staff who actually work there, who can speak to what they do, the type of and level of services and supports that are provided to students within these environments. And I was thinking what would be most productive would be that John Wallishen and the team here would give an overview of what happens at our current location, Olin Avenue, and what like you would have an opportunity to hear from the implementation team's mouth, so to speak, like what is happening, the types of students that we support there, the types of supports that we offer, and a bit about your question and answers relative to the team members here. So I'm going to just introduce John, who will then introduce the intensive intervention teams. John Wallishan.
Just a
Thank you.
second.
Good evening.
Do we have a full time to question as well?
Oh, yeah, you'll have
As
questions.
long
We'll
as
turn this
that's
on.
fine.
Yeah, you can answer questions. You can ask questions. We'll just have
I just
them
wanted to know
present
the
and
protocol.
then, yeah.
Yeah, I was hoping if it's all right for the team to just give a
Yes.
brief overview and then kind of question and answer dialogue after that.
Definitely, thank you.
Yeah, happy to answer any questions. Thank you for having us here tonight. I want to introduce my team. I have Kim Handy, who's a nurse that serves all of our students in the intervention programs. Andy Toney's to my left is our PST, and Allison Stoffaker is one of our social workers that support, again, all our students out at Olin Avenue. All right, so we thought we'd kind of look at kind of who we serve, the models we use, why we believe that we have a need for a district building, and then take some time for questions and answers. So as you're aware of, we're serving 27,000 students in this district. Of those 27,000, 4,000 have IEPs. And we're serving most of those students with our IEPs in our school buildings. And we have roughly, the way students get to us is through the intensive support team. It's a referral made by each school. They get about 500 referrals a year. Of those, they forward about 50 on to us for placements for alternative or intervention placements. Of the 50 that they forward to us, we usually move 40 of those into those programs and support them through those kind of interventions. And it really roughly comes down to about 2% of the students with IEPs in our district and 0.3% of all students in our district that we're serving. So just to try to bring some numbers to this conversation. And we serve kids in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 most of the time in our school buildings. That little red tip of the triangle in Tier 3 are kind of the work that we're doing with kids. And so outside of Olin Avenue, we have some school-based programs, our LEAP programs, our school-based alternative programs, individualized supports. That's kind of that Tier 4. And then Tier 5 are our programs at Olin Avenue. So we have a Next Steps program, a NEON program, Primary Steps program, and the Restore program. And then lastly, up in the highest tier is for kids that we can't serve in that building. We're serving off-campus one-on-one with a teacher, or sometimes two-on-one, or even three-on-one with a teacher, 3 teachers and 1 student. Kim's going to talk about the case management model a little bit.
Yeah, so the way that we serve our students is very unique. It's a case management kind of care coordination system. So we have me, the nurse, we have 2 social workers and a psychologist, full-time psychologist, and we really, along with our SEAs and special ed teachers, are able to do a pretty dramatic wraparound, not just the student, him or herself, but also the family. And that family can sometimes be parents, in quite a few cases, a foster family, a guardian family. We also wrap around to some degree the siblings, get to know the family dynamics. And it's a level of sort of support that is really not possible in a regular school, given the great number of students that each of the support staff serve. For a lot of our parents, it's the first positive experience they've had in often a long, long, long time. So, you know, they've just been struggling with schools. Sometimes their kids have been in several different schools within our district. The parents have been struggling. Sometimes it's difficult to work if you're constantly getting called to come pick up your kid, or there's another suspension, and you know, there's another sort of behavioral issue. So we work very, very hard to reach out and connect with the parents. The placement in our programs is always in combination in working with the parents and with support of the parents. And so we do a lot of home visits. I pick up a lot of medications literally at pharmacies. I take a lot of kids to medical appointments, both regular physicians, but also eye doctors, psychologists, neuropsych evaluations. A lot of my role is to start to get a proper diagnosis for the kids. A lot of them do not have that. In many cases, it's diagnoses, so multiple. So that's sort of our first line of attack. And then the next step is to get good treatment, and Allison will speak to that in just a minute. Psychological treatment, sometimes also medication or medications, most of which are administered to our students at school. We have a high number of kids who are homeless and have really chaotic households, so it's often very helpful to have that consistency with the medications at school. Our kids also are fairly frequently, percentage-wise, in and out of short-term hospitalizations, which you can see along that Tier 4, Tier 5, and or in and out of residential treatment. So, you know, there's a little bit of flow there as they need a higher level of support that we can't give in our school, and they may go in for a month, 6 weeks, sometimes only a week or two for the short-term hospitalization. In the residential treatment, we have a student who just returned to us after 14 months in residential treatment. So there's a huge variety of needs, of levels of support there. We also, I think it's pretty important that the unique needs of our students also mean that, and again, Allison will speak to that in a minute, that we work really closely with our community providers. So CCF, CCS, our court system, but also with our physicians, our psychologists, our neuropsych evaluators. We get to know them very well. We're often there with the student while those visits occur. So it's a really tight weave in with the community, with the parents and the family, as well as with the school team. So now Allison will address the family service.
Can I jump in just 1 second?
Yeah.
One of the pieces I forgot to mention really is the reason students come to us are often for safety concerns. So part of the reason they're not being served in their home building is because they're not being safe, or they're not being safe with themselves, or not being safe with others. So that's kind of what brings them to us.
Yeah, so 2 things. Jonathan earlier mentioned the IST process, so we made this handout, yeah, if you don't mind. So students aren't just placed with us right away. It takes, I don't know, month, 2 months. It's a process. So it's not like we get a name of a student and it's like, okay, let's move them tomorrow. The schools with the IST supports are doing a lot of things before we even hear about these students. So between the case management and the intervention, one partnership we have is with Family Service Madison. Currently at Olin, it's right next door. So students in our Next Steps and Primary Steps programs have access to day treatment. So some of you might have heard to Steps to Success. So MMSD has their own day treatment program that students are able to access, which is unique to our programming. Students and families can also access individual therapy and family therapy. And oftentimes we find that with these students and families, that's a barrier to access to learning at school. And so this partnership is able to bridge that. Also, with Family Service, we have a therapist is on site for 20 hours a week. And she is doing direct support with students and consultation. So working with staff to be more trauma informed, just, you know, if making sure the room is therapeutic. So really meeting the needs of our students. And I don't think that would be possible in a big school building with hundreds of students. So I think that's what I had. So we'll go into intervention-based model, me and Andy.
Yeah. So thanks again, you guys. Just if we can take a second to look at the diagram that we have for placement and IIPs, just so that we can kind of explain how it works. In our district, there are about 500 requests for support from the intensive support team per year. So those staff are responding directly to large school buildings and meeting with the staff to determine what interventions have already been tried, what the progress was with those interventions. It's an exploration into what additional interventions can be tried within that school building. And that process can last, like Allison was saying, up to, you know, a semester or a full school year, where IST is responding and continuing to support the school staff to best meet the needs of the students. That's kind of the blue section of the diagram. If after that process, IST staff determine that the homeschool has done everything that they can to meet that student's needs, they present that student at what's called IST Review Committee, which happens about every 2 weeks. And at that review committee, the homeschool staff have a chance to discuss what they've already done to support the student. The IST staff present some information. We're at the table to discuss what our programs are and how we feel we might best be able to meet the needs of that student. And then at the end of that process, there's a determination whether the student meets criteria for further consideration. Like, nobody at that table in that review committee is making a decision about placement. Just that that student meets criteria and we need to do further consideration. So that's the yellow section. The purple section is really the next steps, where we become involved by staff in our programs, get to really dive into the students' records and get a feel for everything that's been tried historically and see if we feel like we're a good match. Parents get to visit the program and meet the staff that their child would maybe be working with. Our staff go to the homeschool site to observe students in their homeschool setting and kind of see things for themselves. And then an IEP meeting is scheduled, and an IEP team discussion about placement takes place. Again, parents and family play a huge role in that entire process. The vast majority of students who come before us in review committee, parents are begging for a chance to be in our programs. They may have heard it from other parents in the community, or maybe from a physician who works closely with our staff, or it's just the recommendation of school staff. They're fed up, like they're done. They need something different, and they're looking to our programs as a solution. So that's the IEP process, right? If they are accepted into our program, we're intervention based. It's not a destination where students are meant to be for the remainder of their educational life, right? It could be 6 months, it could be a year. It's student specific how long they're going to be in our programs. What's beautiful about it is that, just like special education throughout school buildings that have a full continuum of services, in our small percentage of students, we also offer that continuum. With our programming, whether it's one-on-one with a staff member in an individualized space, or whether it's small group in our primary or next steps or neon programs, or if we can dip into school buildings and access some of our school-based programming, we can meet our students where they're at any given time, because the kids that we serve are on a roller coaster ride. Their trajectory for progress isn't always linear, right? We're meeting them where they're at on any given day and providing the intervention that they need at that time to be as successful as students and human beings as they can be. And that continuum of service allows us to adjust what we're able to provide on a day-to-day basis.
I would like to say also, even between programs. So if a kid is thought to be a good match for, say, neon, and gets a proper diagnosis, gets some supports, gets the wraparound service, sometimes they then end up going to SBA, or maybe half time back to their homeschool. A lot of our kids, I think it's about 40%, have at least some time in their homeschool, and if not during the day, which a number of them do, then for after-school programs. So we always try to keep that connection with the homeschools very tight.
And I think one of the questions is why do we need a building to house these programs? And when I first got to the district, all these programs were out on islands all around the community. And it was really hard to support all those programs. It was hard for support staff to get out to all those programs. And this kind of campus approach that we've developed here allows us to bring a whole team of people into a building to support a group of kids. So even though one program may be housed by walls, there's just a hallway separating all kinds of support staff to be able to serve those kids. So again, what Andy talked about is meeting the needs of our kids day to day, and I think this model really allows us to do that.
Yeah.
One closer to us.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a little, that was when
All right. So that's pretty much of the presentation, so to speak, and at this point we can just have an open conversation.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for being here tonight. This was really in response to our community reaching out to us and asking us to really have a discussion in open session, so that is why we're here today. So I really appreciate your time. It is an opportunity for the board who have some questions to ask that tonight. I did want to say, Kelly, thank you for the background. I was on the board when we were talking about these leased facilities and really wanting us to move away from that. Dean Lumos was really spearheading that and was really wanting us to move in the direction of obtaining our own buildings. And the board did ask staff to go out and look for building purchases as an opportunity. I do remember our conversations about the students that are housed who go to school on Olin Avenue, and just the sadness of not giving our students a place that we own, right? A place that even resembles a school, and that they deserve better, right? And so this is an opportunity for us to really focus on the students that we often miss, right? They're often sort of brushed aside and go to school and struggle in silence. And this is an opportunity for the board to provide a space. I understand the challenges and the questions that our community has about segregation, removing students from their home school environment, but we have to provide, as a school district, many options for our children, right? There's not one way, and we have to explore that. And so I think ultimately for me, it really is providing a space for our children that we often forget. And the Olin property is just not conducive for our children. And so I say that we answer, and we ask the difficult and the tough questions here tonight, but then with the focus really of what is best for our children. And so I do have some questions as far as programming and logistics, but I'm going to open it up to the board now for their questions, and then if it's not asked, I'll come back around. Nikki?
I have 2 questions, 3 comments. Yeah, I'll figure out this mic one of these days. Obviously, today is not the day either. As an individual with autism, I looked upon this very proposal in a very interesting manner. So I look back at the work of Justin Dart, the creation of the ADA, the creation that all children should play together, learn together, study together, and most importantly, be educated together. And I understand the challenges, and I do understand the needs. But I have a few questions on this. I worry about, one, why is the IST team meeting with the homeschool to review student needs before the parents are notified through the IEP? Why are the parents not told right away that the school is saying that they're having problems with their child if the parents are front and center of the investigation? I don't quite understand that.
No, that's very much a part of the process. The intensive support team is working very collaboratively with families. In fact, their involvement is frequently conducted during an IEP meeting, of which families are very much front and center with that process.
But the IEP meeting is the last step in the handout
there are
that
multiple IEP meetings that are involved for students that would that are.
When is the family gets notified?
Yeah, that's very
Before
top
even
one.
the first blue
Yeah.
one.
I'm sorry. When does the family get notified of what?
notified that their child, that the school is stating that they cannot provide needs for their child in a public school setting.
So I think when there's a request for IST support, it's not necessarily to change placement to a different program. That's a misconception. It's the request for support is to utilize the resources of our entire district to have some experts come into the school building and see what else can be done within that school building to best support the needs of the student. And the parent is involved in that whole process. The case manager of the homeschool is the one who completes the IST request form for support. And case managers have regular contact with their parents. And then it would be an ongoing discussion during any IEP meetings, but also like just regular communications with home. The parents are already going to be probably pretty aware of the struggles that the student is experiencing at the school, and most parents are really excited about the idea of specialized staff coming in to support the staff in that building to better meet the needs of their student. It's only after a length of time when the IST staff who've responded feel like they've exhausted all the interventions that can be tried within the building that a student would be brought to review committee, and a parent is aware when that happens.
And Nikki, to your response too, if you look at the numbers,
Yes.
out of the 500 that they are referred to IST, we only have about 40 or 50 that actually.
Yes, I see that.
So it's very small.
So I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is, are we talking about the current programming in Olin, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we're talking about a current program on Olin, which will transfer to the property on Holtzman,
Yes,
right? And
correct.
so the issues you have is about the program.
No,
whether it
it's
be
on both
Holtzman.
actually.
Okay.
Yeah, which I haven't gotten to yet.
So I just want to, so you've had an issue, Nikki, with the.
I have an issue with both the program, less than I have an issue with the building, with the fact that they can't
Okay, so
attend.
can we focus on the building?
I think they all lead up. That's
Okay.
one leads into the other. That's the
Okay.
reason why I
Okay,
did it that way.
Next question.
Yeah, no problem. My question is, in the Holzman building, we decided that play area may or may not be included, correct? Are we going to do the playground or are we not?
So if we ended up purchasing the Holzman property, we'd have, depending on what happens with the property next to West High School, either $700,000 or $1 million in one-time funding that could be used to renovate the space. A playground could be incorporated into that portion of the renovation, or we could simply make sure that it's called out in the next budget that the board will all have access to, and set aside a budget line for a playground as we modify the space. The current space we're leasing at Olin Avenue is available through June of 2021. So there will be no giant hurry for us to immediately move into Holtzman. It would actually afford me the ability to utilize our in-house trade staff to do a lot of the renovation of the space, saving us money and actually allowing for some efficiencies and some customizations as we work with the programming staff. So we would have we'd have a solid year to renovate the space before we actually had to be out of Olin, and a playground could certainly be a part of that renovation.
Are you concerned that 50 years ago, Badger School for the Disabled on the exact same site was closed because it was a segregated school for individuals with disabilities, and now we're creating a segregated school for individuals with disabilities?
Well, of course, that has been very much within our decision-making. I would say this is not a school per se. This is a school building, a multi-purpose building, and we are taking great pains to make the decisions regarding students in these intervention programs. I want to emphasize a couple of points here. When the intensive support team is involved with a school and making decisions around what supports the student may need, they're always asking the question, them as well as the administrative staff, is this a matter of if we provided additional resources to the school, will that mitigate the impact of a student needing to access a different location? That's always part of the procedure here. We know very much the LRE laws here and about whether or not the student can flourish within their home school, their neighborhood school, and in this case, we've made the determination, the IEP teams actually have made the determination beyond resources, beyond additional supports, that this is necessary. So I would look at this as less of a recreating a Badger school and more of a very specific intervention program meeting the needs, the unique needs of a very, very small number of students.
And I have just one last comment, and I mean no offense because I appreciate the presentation. I appreciate all the research and the work that is done. But my last question is this. How many people, if we have build a new elementary school, are going to sign up their kids to go when the playground could be added? Would we have it as a line item object in a budget? Just curious.
I'm not sure, could you restate, I'm not sure I understand the question.
That's a comment, which is.
Okay, Ali?
So, looking at the students you're currently serving right now and kind of groups of students you've served throughout the existence of the program, what is the age of the program, and overall, how many students have you served? And then I hear kind of an emphasis on, you know, providing intervention in a series of moments of crisis in a student's life, and the many factors that create a moment of crisis in a young person's life or in a young person's education. And then getting that student back into their school in a way that meets the needs of that student, whether it be gradual or partial days or after school, but staying linked to that community. When you look at overall throughout the history of the program, how many students have left, gone back to their school, and returned to the program? And then I think I have a few other things I'd like to know.
I mean, I guess.
See what number you pull up.
You know, our numbers as far as the number of students that we serve has remained pretty consistent at that 75. Like, we're not a growing number. Our programs change slightly, but the strict number of our students has remained pretty consistent, and we're not looking to expand on that. As far as transitioning back to homeschools, you know, it varies, but most students start back at their home school with a small period of time, like a class of interest, a particular time of the day with a peer group or a staff member that they have a real deep connection with, and then we build from there. And the goal is, of course, to build back to a full day at that home school. If I haven't said already, throughout the entire process, the student continues to have a case manager at their home school. Like, we have special education teachers, obviously, who become a part of the IEP team, but their team at the home school remains a part of their IEP team throughout the entire placement in any of our programs. You know, there is some give and take with students once they start getting back in, you know, some time back into their home building. They might get a period, and then we add another period and another period, and then they might experience some struggles where we have to decrease the amount of time in the home school, and then we build back up. I can't think of one instance right now where a student has returned to their home school building for their entire day and then come back to our programming at some point down the road. You know, it is a gradual process back to the home school, and we're really thoughtful about it. We have, after a student is placed in our programs, we have an IEP meeting scheduled immediately for 30 days out, where everyone is getting back to the table, especially the parents and family members, to discuss the progress that's already happened. And then we either, you know, it's at least once a quarter that we have an IEP meeting scheduled, again, to get back and talk about progress so that we can flow back flow the student back to their home school for as much time as possible based on the progress that they're demonstrating.
Yeah, so I would add too, just want to clarify, we've mentioned 75 students here. That would be all students in the intensive intervention programs. It's actually well beyond just the Olin Avenue. So that is inclusive of our school-based alternative at Sherman and Shabazz. It's inclusive of our students in LEAP programs, which are programs within 3 of our schools. Neon, LEAP have been in existence for well over 15 years. And so these aren't necessarily new, but what we have seen is a slight contraction in those programs and a building of a more therapeutic day option. And that has really been in response to the mental health needs of our students. These are much more therapeutic in nature, where there are individual and group mental health services that are provided to our youth, where we realized in the past that the singular answer of Neon and LEAP did not work for everyone, and that we're being more precise with the type of intervention and the supports that students are provided, and it's actually providing much better results in terms of the intervention being provided, the students successfully transitioning to their home school, and they're not coming back, so to speak, for like another to spend more time within our programs.
And it's a hard question to answer, Allie, I think, because I mean, we can come up with a number, but there's a lot of things that influence those transitions. So depending on when we get students, so if we get them in early elementary school, our goal is to get them back to elementary school. We sometimes return those students, and then we see new struggles emerge in middle school. And that could be related to interventions, or it could be related to other life things that have happened with those students and their families that have caused some turmoil and sort of reignited some of those needs that the student has.
And I think to your question also, it's fairly rarely a one crisis issue. Yes, a lot of kids also have trauma and specific trauma events, but for most of our kids, it's mental health issues, often multiple, that they've been struggling with since childhood, really early childhood. So these are not usually a kid where, you know, a parent dies and it's a one dramatic event and they end up with us. That doesn't happen. That's not the profile of the kids that come to us.
Thank you for that clarification. And thank you all for speaking to the question. I really appreciate understanding the length of time in which the program or intervention has existed, and then, you know, what brings students in or out of the program. I think notifying parents around whether or not their student is eligible for this program or might benefit from this program is one way of communicating. I'm wondering, how often do parents initiate interest in seeing their student be there? So there's the kids who are like, hey, we're still looking for options because everything we've provided isn't working. Here is this option, and we're introducing this to you kind of when we're getting close to the bottom of the barrel, versus parents coming and saying, hey, I've heard about this. This sounds like it might be a better fit for my kid than other things we've tried.
I get about 10 phone calls a year just from parents who have accessed the websites and trying to figure out who can support their students. And so I get those calls wondering about our programs and if our programs could support their individual needs. And that's when we talk about IST and the referral process and how that all works.
And many of our staff members are really, you know, they're deeply involved in the community, so they know a lot of students, parents, and family members, and so word of mouth, you know, we frequently receive requests from family members through our staff who know those families, right? And then again, we still want to go through this process because there's safeguards built in where the homeschool is involved, and the case manager at the homeschool needs to reach out to IST to have somebody. So we still honor the process because of the importance of each of those steps. But I think parents and families find out about us from word of mouth really frequently.
Those are sort of the informal ways that families learn about it. The more formal is at a review revise IEP, where the intensive support team, the team is coming together saying, here's what we're going to try. We're going to try this. Here's how we'll know if it works. Well, a parent may say, well, what if it doesn't? Well, these are the options. And it's sort of like beginning to describe like what's all like on the plate, so to speak, of possibilities, and that's where some of the initial description of programs and services are provided to the families.
Okay,
I'm
great.
sorry, I had one last comment, and I think it's easy to focus on kind of the more programmatic components of the conversation, especially because we have you all here as resources, and I really appreciate your ability to give us a sincere outline of what kids have available to them programmatically, because I think there's some very intensive interventions that we wouldn't see elsewhere, and so it allows for us to have a sincere analysis of what you all are doing. I think there's the building component of it, which is, how do we make sure that kids have spaces that honor their ability levels, their needs, that are good places for our staff to be working in, that we can invest in, and speaking to, how do we utilize the taxpayer's dollar to the greatest extent, investing in property that will most likely gain in value versus renting, to me seems like kind of the no-brainer of the conversation. In thinking about this conversation, I thought about the fact that we do have, the majority of the board are people who had IEPs as children. So I think we're talking about both segregation, and we're also talking about stigma related to disability. And I think when we talk about segregation, that's a real conversation. Those are real concerns that people have. We don't want to isolate kids because they're disabled. We also don't want to stigmatize a kid getting what they need. And so I think that is the balance we're trying to navigate in this conversation, is how do we make sure students have access to what they need, and also have as inclusive an experience as benefits the student, right? Because I think we can say, like, we want every kid to be in the same classroom, we want every kid to be on the same playground, but does that preference certain students or benefit certain students and not benefit other students is a thing I think we need to take into consideration. So if you're in the math class, you're not getting anything out of it, then, I think, we can't use diversity as a decoration within the classroom when it's an actual child that we're talking about. And so I think there's a lot to take into consideration, and I very much appreciate y'all being able to speak to the varying components of programming.
Thank you, Ollie. Great. Savion?
Well, thank you for being here tonight and the work you do on a day-to-day basis. It's some of the most important work that has to be done in the district. I was wondering if you can speak to, during this process, the extent that physicians or folks like mental health experts are consulted on whether programs are a good fit, and they and a good fit for a separate space as well.
Yeah, so that's something we've been really taken on in the last 3 years since a nurse was assigned to the intervention programs. There wasn't a nurse assigned the first couple of years. So that's one of my big roles, and we've made huge headway. Both the psychologist and I have gotten to know a lot of the physicians, the psychiatrists, the neuropsych evaluators, and been actually instrumental in making that connection happen. And so, yeah, a lot of the physicians in town now, even the pediatricians, a lot of them now are aware of these programs and will sometimes ask, is there anything else that is available for this kiddo? And one of the concerns that's come out is, for example, what happens in high school? Because we don't have a lot of that. Our programs are basically 1st through 8th. And then we do have the Restore program for kiddos who are up for expulsion, which is mostly high school, not exclusively. But that's, that even comes up where the doc will say, well, what happens next year? This kid is not ready for a big school building.
Can I just add one thing?
Oh, please.
We do have one physician that's going to come visit because the student hasn't had those regular checkups, and so medication is in question, and so the physician is purposely asked to come to our space to see the student while they're at school to see like what ADHD medication might be more applicable. So that's one thing that's coming up.
So
Yeah,
I'm pretty excited. That's the first time we've made that
great.
happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and our staff also, we have a staff of roughly 30. It's super tight knit. The turnover is really small, and we all do everything. I mean, it's a really very supportive group, I think, of the students. We really love these kiddos.
And it's important to mention the mental health professionals that are in our site can really have some authentic assessment of their kids. Oftentimes we talk with those professionals, and what we're describing to them is so different than what they're hearing from the student, from the parent, from whatever, that there's that disconnect. And so really having them on site or having Kim be able to talk to those physicians really provides that authentic
Anytime I go to a doctor's appointment, or Katie, the psychologist, we always go to the teachers. Well, of course, we know the kids too, and just obtain information and feedback, and we bring that. And if there's something specific that's really concerning, we'll oftentimes call in advance and give the physician a heads up.
Yeah.
Please check in about depression, something. Please check in about anxiety. We're really concerned about other things, so we have that kind of really tight connection.
Yeah, having that mental health expert and physician expertise or consultation to say that this intervention is best is really important. Could you speak to some of the physical limitations and challenges in the existing space or current space where you're at right now?
Some is being able just to configure the space that would best meet the needs of the kids. So even in our therapeutic program, it's one big open room with 3 classrooms. And we run a day treatment program out of one of those classrooms. If something spills out of that room, it affects the entire room, the entire program.
Yeah.
And when we initially conceptualized it, we would have liked to configure it differently to provide a more discrete entrance and exit point for that programming.
Okay.
In our current building, we share the space at Olin with a number of other organizations, right? So it's not distinctly ours. It's hard to create a school feeling when, there's other adults showing up at the building and it kind of looks like an office building. Holtzman looks like a school. It's I think the students and the staff and the families would really feel like it was a place where you were coming for educational purposes during the school day, and we could make it really distinct, the feel of it, from walking into the building to going to separate spaces within it, again, to meet students' needs along that continuum, right in one space with a centralization of all of our staff members being able to branch out to the individual areas within the building.
Okay.
It makes it a lot more predictable. Our kiddos, they need predictability, they need consistency. And if we were able to control all of the variables within our building to the greatest extent that we can, right, without needing to worry about other organizations and other people coming in and out of the building, it just increases our ability to best meet the needs of our students.
Yeah.
I would just say too, kind of an analogy, it seems like we're renting an apartment right now, okay? We don't own it, so we can put paint on it, but we might have to repaint it. Maybe we can't put paint on it.
No nails in
the wall. But if Holtzman, we would own it. So we can design it, which has help, and really make it our own. And to Gloria's point, these kids deserve the best, and they're often not seen or heard. And so I think if this Holtzman property goes through, it's our house. It's our school, our home, however you want to say it, but we would own it. So we'd have more ownership and
we get fairly frequent complaints from the other people in the building about noise levels and disruption, and so
we're upstairs running through the building.
Yeah.
I mean, literally constant, daily, almost complaints.
These are students who deserve
to make noise.
Deserve to be students, deserve a degree of privacy, without fear of judgment and stigma from other, strangers.
And not surprisingly, one of the biggest complaints we hear from the kiddos we work with is breakfast and lunch, right? So all of our food is brought in, and it's all packaged up right there on site. They don't have the ability for any kind of a la carte anything. They get whatever's delivered. And the Holtzman site has a commercial kitchen, has a cafeteria. I think it could provide lots of opportunities for staff and students to explore.
The bathrooms are also a problem.
Oh, sorry, I have one more.
Okay.
Sorry.
For
Okay,
some of the
last one.
programs, we have one bathroom. So staff, students, everybody uses the same
For
bathroom.
about 50 people, plus staff.
Yeah, more than that.
Yeah. Could you speak to how this could improve, I guess talk a little bit more in depth about how this could improve student outcomes and how you would go about or trying to measure those?
I'll take a crack at that, and then you can. So I did write some of that in the memo that was provided. I mean, that's at least like a starting point. So it was just alluded to here. I think if we had the opportunity to like do it over, we would design the spaces so that there was enough space so that every aspect of the space is very intentional for instructional purposes. So I think in Olin is better than what we used to have, which was nothing, but it's also, you know, like it's too big in certain areas and too small in other areas. So number one, there'd be kind of the technical fix of like, how would we design the instructional spaces so that they do provide the privacy, so that there's whole group, smaller group, like private session areas. So that's one thing. You know, I also think that we're just learning on about a multitude of specific interventions. I saw that you had dialectical behavioral therapy. Our staff are really becoming more and more immersed in partnering with the mental health providers to kind of work in like very hand in glove with them on developing regulation skills, developing the necessary personal dispositions so that academics are actually an option. You know, for some of the students who have been in perpetual turmoil, you know, talking about, you know, solving for X, you know, in math or reading along a novel, it hasn't necessarily been an easy way to really connect. But we're actually learning how to have those increasingly longer moments of time for instructional purposes, which are beginning to pay off. So I actually think that like this is positioning the team in a much better place to begin to really go much deeper with their academics.
Thank you.
Ananda?
Yeah. So thank you for this comprehensive presentation. And I'm going to continue to shift us to talk about the building, but I want to just acknowledge that I met Allison when you were doing your in-service, and the board always joke with me that like I know almost everybody, so it's great to see you here. And you became a restorative justice leader in the school when you were doing service, and I really appreciate your voice in this presentation and your care and your passion.
Thank you.
The second point is this building is sort of like I would say in however way I'm looking at my neighborhood is like directly behind where I live. So this is in my neighborhood, and I'm very familiar to the location and how much beauty and potential there's all around that building, but also the challenges because it's the South Side and it's been a neighborhood that's been neglected by the city from being the town of Madison and so on. So I'm curious about like how has been your thinking, or what's that?
I said it's being neglected by the people, not the city.
Right. So around the opportunities in a neighborhood from a perspective of, you know, even walkability to things. You know, I know the city has been, I mean, I've been like, since I moved there 10 years ago, I've been like always advocating, like we'd have limited sidewalks and bike paths and so on and so forth. I'm like just curious about like having the building in like such a large space, like what has been some of the things that has come up from you from a like an opportunity perspective and utilization of that, but also advocacy for making sure there is sort of the logistical pieces around the building.
I'll start and then you can go next. So I'm kind of snickering because when we initially began to find a location for Restore, we were actually looking for a location that didn't have any shiny objects near it, right? So this is our expulsion abeyance program, and we did not want to be close to something like more exciting than our school, right? So Olin met that bill. There's nothing exciting. There's no gas station. There's no mall. There's no restaurant. I mean that we can afford, so it checked that box, so to speak. This other location is actually, like you hit on it, it's like a very beautiful location. It feels much more like embedded within a natural setting, which is not the case in the current location. That has a very austere exterior to it, and there's nothing very exciting about the outside.
Yeah.
So, part of the program we have a fleet of bikes. And so our students are able to get on their bikes. So we have maintenance aspect. We have riding the bikes in the neighborhood. So that's one thing that I think that we can take advantage of. I mean, it's a fairly low traffic area, and it would be conducive to that type of activity. Obviously, in the warmer months. And then I'll let John build on that.
Yeah, I think John covered it. But another thing to me, the only concern I have with Olin is Olin Avenue itself. Right?
Yeah,
there's a lot of
it's
traffic
busy,
on
yeah.
that road. And if we have kids who elope from the building, we just want to make sure they're safe. And we do a pretty good job of that here now, but it requires vigilance.
Yeah.
And I think the other location would provide an easier. I don't know if there's other thoughts from our team.
One big benefit of the location of the building is that it's centrally located, similar to Olin. We have students from all over the district. It is nice that it's close to the Beltline. We have a program van that can hold up to, I think it's 12 people. So we can get out to community activities as groups whenever we need to. And it's just nice to be centrally located so we can branch out to all the resources that our city has and the commute for students coming into us from wherever they live around the city, wherever their home schools are, that they can get to us as quickly as possible.
I would just add that I'm excited it's in the neighborhood. I think that brings that perspective that the kids don't have right now, right? They're in an office building, parents show up and they don't know which door to go into and they're confused, and I think that location, it's tucked away, but yet it's still pretty open, and I think it just has that feel that we're lacking right now.
Thank you. So I appreciate all the scrutiny that everybody else had in the program. I'm not gonna go into the programmatics of it, but I do want to hear a little bit about how has your students and families been receiving this information around a potential relocation of the program?
We haven't been discussing that with our students or families yet because we've had no word that was going to happen.
Yeah.
You got another question, I think?
Were you going to say anything?
I was just going to, our students and their families are fairly used to disappointment. So until we know for sure that we're going to be able to provide something that we really want to, I mean, it should be exciting news to give to them, but we're holding off until we know for sure.
Even if approved, it's a year, more than a year out.
So they might not be the same students.
Exactly, right. So yeah, we're just tempered with expectations in terms of not wanting to make any assumptions. And I think when is the appropriate time, we'll begin to share the transition.
I have one more, but this time is for Kelly. So on the memo, your memo, you had a table with the allocation for different years.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that you can walk us through a little bit on that, if it's okay.
Yeah, sure. So just wanted to put together kind of financial analysis for the board, and with some of Chad and Andy's help on expertise in the operation expense side in particular, wanted to take a look at kind of what this actually looks like from a year-to-year basis. So starting from the top, because we have in Holtzman a wide open space that would not necessarily need to be used for this program, the idea is that we could put a professional learning space in the building, which would then save us not only about $100,000 a year, which is listed in this graph at other costs that we've been spending, but we could also rent it out. The school district has a facility rental process well in place, someone that rents out our buildings morning, afternoon, and night. And this then could go into that property. And having talked to other school districts, we think there's a large demand for this kind of space, not just from our own district for professional development, for others. So we have estimated not only savings on the professional development expenditures, but revenue on the potential rental of this space. So in addition to that, the lease cost saved, I've already mentioned, over $240,000 annually. That comes out of John's IDEA budget. That those costs, if we were not leasing, would be saved by the district. Continuing to go down. Our lease, we pay almost all the expenses in Olin at this point, including Chad's team having to worry about the HVAC system, even though we don't own the building. So our operating expenses of this particular building are quite high. It would not be kind of the most advantageous lease itself. So there's just operating expenses. It's saved on one part of this spreadsheet, and then you see operating expenses going out on the other side of the spreadsheet. So we know we'll be saving expenses by moving out of Olin. But of course, if we purchase a building, we'll have to invest in it. So you kind of see some of that operational money going back into it to make sure we're maintaining the building in front of us. And then what you see in here is we're building on the front end $500,000, at least this is that kind of the money Chad just mentioned on the table, that's available to invest in the building itself, currently on that building purchase line item. So that would come out, you know, in year one theoretically, depending on obviously the timeline of construction. To overall analyze kind of the net cost versus the purchase price, how long does it take for us to pay off this investment? And what this shows is under 20 years, somewhere between 14 and 20 years, this building has largely paid off itself. And for an investment of a building like this, we think that's a really good return on investment. As I think Ali mentioned, if the district decides down the road that it's no longer a property we need, we're pretty confident that it could be turned around and sold, and being the fact that we don't pay capital gains, that this is a pretty sound investment. So that's essentially what that's there for.
And then I know I had asked you this before, out of the either 500,000 facility investment allocated or any other thinking around updating the building and so on, what would be the minimum that we can expect to have in that building from a sustainable energy use or any other environmentally friendly or environmental sustainable sort of investment? What would be the, I'm trying to ask either a percentage or, I know there is some interest around that investment. I know some of it's.
So to make it kind of sustainable energy, if you wanted to do a project there, that would be above and beyond this cost. And then do you want to give a cost on what, I don't know, a solar project would look like, if that's where you're headed? Is that where you're headed?
I mean, we have our goal for the district, so I'm curious if this building would help us reach that goal.
It's fair to say that this building probably is more efficient than most of our schools because it's newer construction. So we would there will be some need for us to get in there and do some maintenance, and we would continue to put in highly efficient mechanical systems. But kind of to Kelly's point, if the board sent us in the direction that we wanted to make this site more environmentally friendly than it currently is, that would be an investment above and beyond just the building renovation. That's going to be primarily flooring, ceiling, lights, walls, working with John's programming staff to make sure that we kind of build the inside of the building around the needs of the students. So it would be an investment above and beyond. So could you put a $100,000 solar array on the metal roof? Quite easily. That building is kind of set up for that. But then it'd be kind of working with the board again to find the money to budget it and kind of continue to bring down our carbon footprint on these sites. I think there's a chance you get, not even a chance, you get more bang for your buck on a project at one of our older schools that doesn't have higher efficiency windows, won't have new lights, because we'll probably put new lights in at Holtzman, that would have a quicker return on investment. But we could look at it if you'd like.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for the very comprehensive introduction to the programs.
Chris?
So I want to echo all the thanks that have gone around. Before I jump, I have two kind of bigger picture questions, but first I just have a clarification for Kelly. That is, it's pretty clear that the lease costs that will save IDEA money will save us money in the general fund. But the facility rent that we're paying right now for PD is coming out of title money, correct? Not out of general fund? So we would actually just be saving title money for the PD part of this investment?
Yeah, a good portion of it is coming out of Title IV, that's correct.
Okay, so this would not, that 100,000 wouldn't necessarily represent general fund savings.
Right, but it would be able to be used directly for professional development for teachers versus for renting a big conference room in a hotel. So you'd be able to return money back to the program staff to turn around for high quality PD for teachers.
Okay, thanks. So I've been thinking about this project in terms of two focuses, and one of them is practical. Like right now, we're paying a fair amount of rent and operating expenses to rent a building that doesn't appear to be meeting the needs of our kids in a location that we think is safe for our kids. So it seems like we need to make a change. What we're doing right now is not working well. And one possible change is going to purchasing and going to the Holzman property. Because I haven't been on the board that long, I'm not aware of the district having done any kind of serious analysis of what it would look like to take advantage of some of our underutilized space in an existing building and using some money to retrofit or remodel or whatever we have to do to use space we already have to best meet the needs of our kids with really intensive needs. And I'm wondering if you can speak more, not just to, well, we think Holtzman is better, but how much investigation did you actually do of like what underutilized space we have and how could we possibly use that? You know, one advantage of putting these programs into an existing school is that then you've got an obvious easy way to transition kids gradually back into inclusive education, as well as avail them to the services we have in our regular schools, like physical education and fine arts instruction, that might be harder to provide in a separate building that's not necessarily a school, it's just a school building.
So
I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm going to answer it real quick from what our facilities plan team did, and then of course John and team as far as what it looks like to put a program like this in a school. So where we have space largely in the city, I mean our facility team always looks at this, isn't always in the areas of where you need it. So yes, we have some space in Lindbergh. Unfortunately, that's so far kind of north and on the outskirts of the city that that's not a practical location for a centralized program like this. Yes, we might have some space on the 3rd floor of East High School. Again, not a place that you would be conducive to the K-8 wraparound education kind of that they're providing at the top of East High School. So as part of the whole long-range facility plan process, we as a team have looked at where do we have space. And unfortunately, part of the challenges with where we have space is that it's not in the areas of where we largely need it. So that's kind of, yes, we've looked at it. And we wanted to remain central for this location, which is part of the reason we ended up here.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that we already have programs within schools. We mentioned those earlier about the school-based alternative located in a middle school. We have 3 LEAP programs, so elementary age intensive intervention programs, Olson, Marquette, and Randall. And so we've definitely thought about that. That's our preference, is to have programs within our building locations to the maximum extent that does allow for the flexibility to utilize PE specials, gym, other types of classes, and begin to phase into like more integrated environments. And at the same time, the needs of the group of students that we are talking about, we feel are different than those within those program locations. And so we felt like these are students that needed their own very intensive and very separate program location for a duration of time, in which case they would then be transitioning back to the neighborhood school. And so again, I would just reiterate what Kelly said. There are some schools with some space availability, but in terms of their proximity or where they're situated, it's not necessarily conducive to a district-wide program.
I think from the perspective of taxpayers, especially as we're going into a pretty high-priced referendum, telling them that we can't utilize our existing space even though we have it and we need to buy another building is hard for me. So it's a consideration.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that students' needs are coming first, right? An area like the top floor of Lapham would not provide the kind of individualized space that the students in the program you just learned about would be conducive to kids. So if we're not providing the environment for the kids most in need, then I don't think we're doing our due diligence either.
And so that actually feeds into the second consideration, which is more philosophical, and I think that gets to what you're talking about. How do we best serve our students with really intensive needs? And I think there's been more, you guys have said a fair amount about that, and I just have a couple of things I want to clarify. First of all, do we have evidence that this approach is working? You've talked a little bit about it. I haven't seen it. I would really like to see more evidence of having this program at Olin right now is actually helping kids integrate back into regular schools and hopefully move on to graduate, college, career, and community ready, which is our goal for every child. And being presented with more evidence that this approach is actually doing that would be really helpful. Likewise, I would like to see a stronger set of metrics proposed for measuring the continued success of this program than what appears to mostly be like how many kids we're serving in their attendance data. I'd actually like to see some more thought put into how do we know we've actually met the needs of kids who have really intensive needs beyond are they showing up and are we counting them? So
I think that's our conversation too, and that's a focus this year to really get that data put together, as well as trying to get some more anecdotal data from families about how they're feeling about the supports they're receiving. So through survey data and some other things we're going to implement this year.
Okay. And just to polish that off.
Can I partially answer that?
Oh, yeah.
Because I did get a chance to see one of the programs and the testimonies of the students, and to me, that's a data that is extremely important that often doesn't get translated and when we talk about numbers and percentages and so on. And pretty much every student spoke highly of how this type of programs were like lifesaver to them, and how also they spoke to the relationship that they had with the staff in ways that I feel like, how do we, to me, the question that I have is like, how do we replicate some of the amazing strategies that have been used around relationship and connection and persistence in early intervention, than really try to scrutinize the program or get into too much of the data. So I appreciate your question, but I just wanted to share what I have witnessed from John's program.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I also just want to clarify, when students go into the programs at Olin Avenue, have we done everything possible to serve them in their home schools first? Like, is this a situation where a kid needs one-to-one or one-to-two support and we feel like we just can't provide one-to-one or one-to-two support in a regular school, so we're moving them into a facility where we can? I just want to clarify that. Is that happening, or?
No, that's not. So if it's a matter of staffing, that's where this is all kind of contiguous with the conversations with our administrative team. If this is a matter of can staffing solve this, we go with the staffing to have students remain in their neighborhood school. There simply are situations, however, where even if we provided additional staffing, it would not necessarily have the intended impact of stabilizing the student and providing them the type of support that they need within their further school program.
Okay, just a second. I have not asked.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then we'll turn it back to you and okay. So the safety is a huge sort of my perspective and where I always go to in my mind. And so we talked a little bit about safety at Olin, right? Being on the second floor, you're sharing the building with others. And given the current situation across the country, you know, people entering our schools and harming our children. I view Olin right now as really an unsafe place for our children, right? From my understanding, people can come and go, right? They are moving through hallways or stairways or elevators where other people are at. Is that correct?
Well, it is possible, but there's only one door to the building that is open during the day, and that's for Journey Mental Health.
Okay.
And it's one unique part of the building. Okay. And so if some of their clients start to walk in other directions, all of our programs have locked doors. Okay. So nobody's getting into those programs. Okay. And if any staff see anyone they don't recognize, they're talking with them and connecting and trying to figure out where they need to go.
Yeah. I think that's always my concern. Right?
Yeah.
When we have our young kids in environments, right, parking lots, and where it's not controlled by the school district, and just the threat of anything happening, right, and where the school district could be responsible for providing an unsafe situation for our children. I think with any building that we own, right, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to keep our kids safe in a way that our security staff and our general staff understand sort of the parameters and the regulations around buildings that are safe. And so that is why I feel, one of the reasons why I feel strongly about having a building that we control. It is safe, right? And so that is where my mind goes to when we are talking about having our own building. Students, Ananda asked a little bit about students' perspective. I mean, I would really like to see what students feel and parents on what they need in a facility, right? How they would feel in an environment that's inclusive, and what does that look like? And so if we were to go down this road, or even not, right? I mean, I think we have to start asking our students and our parents and get their voice in what does a safe, inclusive environment look like for them. And so just something to consider moving forward is really giving that voice. So it'd be helpful to us as we're making decisions on planning for what this building could look like for.
Yeah.
And so this building is currently in the town of Madison. And so the city will acquire that at some point. And so I think this is a question for Kelly. And how, or maybe not a question, it's just, can you just share with the board on what that process looks like and with the city and what that area will look like, once the city acquires it?
Yeah, I think a lot of things are in flux right now. So depending, like a lot of decisions need to be made at the city's standpoint. But by 2023, the city will own this neighborhood, and it's currently owned by the town. So Ananda mentioned earlier, kind of no sidewalks, very little to no infrastructure. The city is planning significant infrastructure in and around this building, which, if for no other reason, will increase the value of this building. So you will likely see sidewalks. You will likely see streetlights. You will likely see kind of fiber and other infrastructure being built underneath the streets, with then new streets following. Not in the next 3 years, but in the 5 years after that. That's all part of kind of the broader, bigger plan. The city has a lot of work to do around those specific details. But I myself have talked to the city about this piece of property, and I myself have talked to them about kind of making sure that infrastructure was reaching both Badger Rock, which was also part of our conversation, and Holtzman. And they've kind of rest assured that it's in part of their planning process right now. They have people working on all this to decide exactly what, and where, and how. But this kind of neighborhood will have significant investments in the upcoming decade.
Great, thank you. And then also, just to, Dell's point, who spoke with us earlier, and then also Chris, I appreciate your question, and really really identifying and assessing if what we're doing is working, right? I strongly believe that we need a diverse opportunities for learning in our school, right? And if that means taking a child who's dealing with a whole host of challenges, trauma, right? It is important for us to intervene and help support the child, right? And what I like about this is that it's not, we are utilizing community support, right? We are wrapping ourselves around this child. And, I think that we have to really consider that, but also assessing if what we're doing is working and where do we have to adjust, right? And really keeping track of our children as we're moving through this process. Now I know you are dealing with really some children who have been exposed to a lot of trauma, right? And that's the reality that we are dealing with today. Mental health support. When we talk to our teachers and our staff, that is what we're hearing. Right? When we are dealing with behavior issues in our schools, those are the root causes and issues. So I appreciate the work that you do day in and day out to help support these children, to prepare them for transition into our schools. And so that's why I think it's so critical for us as a board and as a community to really invest in these children who ultimately will be progressing through our school district and provide them a path for opportunity. But I really, as a board, need the numbers, and we need to assess if what we're doing is working. I don't really necessarily, I believe strongly that you're doing what you need to do, but I think in order to invest and continue to invest in this, the growth in the children that are going to need this is only going to grow, right? You're probably seeing this right in front of your eyes. And so, yeah, I think to Dell's point and to Chris is really looking and bringing out, assessing what we're doing and if it's working. Right?
Yeah.
She was asking if she can join the phone right now. Can I call her?
Sure. Yeah. No, let's just.
I was just going to, actually, Gloria, you were similar to my point, where I have with the whole precise how close it is to water. Individuals with autism especially are drawn to bodies of water, large bodies of water. I worry safety-wise, if we do have a developer, do we have plans in place that will prevent any drowning or situations? Are there any fences? Are there?
I think that's a great question. Just a second, guys. Just a second. So, Olin is right by.
Or did I get my?
Olin is by
the creek is what I meant.
Yeah.
Your call can only be completed if dialed.
Towards the creek. Or did I get my map upside down? I got my maps upside
That's
down.
okay. I know you had expressed concern. It's a valid concern. And I think you were talking about a different building that, yeah.
That would explain it.
That would explain it. So, no, great question and great, I'm glad you mentioned that. Was that the only?
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, so I want to point out just a couple tendencies in the conversation in terms of the idea of students being ready for a place that in like the term regular school to me is a further stigmatization of disability. Like the purpose of the school is to provide learning, right? And so if that is what we're rooted to, and a student is learning best in one space versus another, that's a perfectly fine school. There's no regular school that I'm interested in talking about. The other thing I wanted to get at is this idea of parent participation, which I think is coming around. We want to hear from parents and we want to hear from students. And my understanding is that no student is put in this programming against their will or against the desire of their parent. So parents are participating, and I think one of the things that can be really hard for me as a parent who's had to make complex decisions about my own child's education is when folks who are not, eating dinner with your kid every day pretend that they know better than you do what your kid needs. And so what you all outlined for us was that there is parent participation, that this is honestly often an ongoing process that starts in early childhood in which parents are asking for support, advocating for their student, meeting with specialists, and this becomes a progression of that advocacy from parents in collaboration with a team that supports the student. And so the other thing I want to point out is that I just think it's an inappropriate thing to say that people should be wary of our leadership if we purchase a building for a specific group of kids who benefit greatly from that level of investment because we have open spaces other places. One, I think it's not that we can't use space in other buildings. It's just that we're not necessarily going to use space in other buildings for this. There are other options in terms of how we use excess space, vacant space, space that fluctuates from year to year, right? Because let's say you do have space in a school because you have low enrollment one year, and then you have a different level of enrollment the next year, and that space tightens around the program, right? So having a stable space that's specific to the needs of these young people, I think, is an efficient use of funding, is an efficient one-time use of funding, and it allows for these young people to have a space that's customized to their learning and to their needs, versus going, well, we have a little bit of space here and a little space there, and so why don't we place these students there, not because it's what they need, but because we think it's what looks cost effective. And I think that to me, doesn't center the needs of the young people that we're all coming together to serve. And so I think we can use open spaces for all kinds of things. I don't think that this program is a fit to put just anywhere where there's a little bit of extra space. And I think that these programs have existed for a significant amount of time, and folks have participated in having their students in these placements. And I think it's a little sad to think that we're not calling it segregation or having this level of intensity around these programs until we're talking about investing in a space or facility for these students. And so I think I think making sure young people have a facility that meets their needs and allows for them to learn with dignity is part of the conversation that we're having. And I wanted to redirect some of the comments that I thought may not allow us to emphasize those points.
Okay, great. I think we've had, I think the community requested and the board, right, requested an opportunity to have an exhaustive conversation and get our questions. Did you have a question? Oh, I thought.
I think Kate wants to chime in.
Okay, Kate, did you want to say anything?
Hey folks, sorry I missed all but the last 1 minute of this discussion, so I'm not sure exactly the best way to weigh in right now. I'm not sure, maybe Gloria, you can direct me a little bit on where we're at in the dialogue.
So we're closing out. I think that the board members asked a lot of questions, made a lot of good comments. We have staff here who did a presentation on the intensive intervention programs that are currently at Olin. And I mean, it was a really good discussion, and we got our questions answered. If you have any questions at this time, you can go ahead and ask them.
I guess I don't want to rehash things that have already been gone over. I think, look, from an instructional model perspective, I'm very supportive of the instructional model that we are using currently, and hopefully will continue to use to support the young people. in some of these programs. I think Ali was just speaking a little bit about space, and I do have some concerns about bringing new buildings into the district network at this point in time, given that we have a number of buildings and space that is underutilized. That said, I guess I wouldn't suggest sharing space, just given the nature of the model that we want to be using to support these young people. So I guess I'd love to explore at some point even how we could use our whole buildings differently. And that's not a short process or a process to kind of initiate tonight, but there are a number of middle schools that are 50% capacity or under, and a significant amount of space that we could free up if we wanted to think differently about boundaries. Again, a much longer discussion to initiate, but I'm a little bit, I guess I would be concerned about bringing more buildings into the network at this point, given that we are a flat to falling enrollment district.
Kate, can I ask a follow-up?
So again, I think those are all, and if those are not directionally correct with this discussion, forgive me, I'm coming in a little bit cold,
So I just want to make sure, I'm like, are you advocating for keeping students in the current location and not buying the building, but also not using? Yeah, Kate, I'm like, I'm not clear on what you're advocating for.
I think very practically, I would keep the current situation for the amount of time that we can build a plan to use our existing building differently, but that would be a discussion to have with the full board if the full board wants to go that direction.
Okay, great. If any board members have any additional questions between now and our vote on Monday, feel free to send them to staff, and we'll get your questions answered. Okay, but I think we had a really good discussion tonight. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate your time and the work that you do every day for our children.
Thank you. We just want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to come and speak with you tonight, and extend an offer to come visit at any point for any of the board. We'd love to show you around, introduce you to our staff, and show you the work that we do.
Great.
So,
I will see you Thursday.
yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Say, Rand, you're going Thursday, correct? What time?
In the morning.
Okay, I was wondering if you want to piggyback. If not, that's okay too.
Okay.
All right. So next to the next agenda item, it's the
separate words too.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Vote on direction of board representative to tax incremental finance review board relative to resolutions to approve the use of the half-mile rule for TIDs number 41 and TID number 35. All right, so let's start with the first one. It is recommended that the Board of Education instruct Representative Chris Carusi to support the use of half-mile rule relative to tax incremental district number 41 at the next meeting of the Joint Review Board on December 12th, 2019. Second.
Before we start voting, maybe I should talk a little bit about what this is.
Can we do that? Can we do that discussion?
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So you second?
I'll second it. Yeah.
Okay. Let's have a discussion.
Okay. So just really quick, I'll give you an overview of what this is about. So back when we did our last TID vote, we basically voted on allowing these two TIDs to reinvest some of the money they have made into infrastructure in the area. In terms of the TID that is in the Todd Drive area, it's for more street lighting, which is a really good thing to do. And for the TID near Whitney Way, it's for street improvements in the area. Also a really good use of public money. This is a formality. TIDs have the right to use TID funding for half a mile outside of the boundary of that TID for improvements. It's called the half-mile rule. So for both of these TIDs, they want to extend these improvements, the street improvements and the lighting improvements, a half a mile beyond the boundaries of the actual TID. And so we're voting today to let me go to the meeting on Friday and either approve or not approve this half-mile rule. There were some things in the memos that were mildly concerning, like they might want to extend the duration of these TIDs down the road, and doing that would pull property off the tax rolls, which we don't like, but we're not voting on that actual part of it right now. All we're voting on is the half-mile rule. So that's really the main consideration that you're directing me to vote on Friday.
Chris, what's your recommendation on this?
I would recommend voting yes on both of these. It's a good investment in the neighborhoods where these TIDs are located.
Any questions? All right, all in favor of this is we're going to do them separately. Okay, so this is TID 41. This is the University Avenue Whitney Way area. I'm sorry, Anika, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Sorry,
Next.
Kate, I didn't hear.
I heard her.
Kate?
Yep, I was fine.
Thank you.
Next one, it is recommended that the Board of Education instruct Representative Chris Carusi to support the use of half-mile rule relative to tax incremental district number 35 at the next meeting of the Joint Review Board on December 12, 2019. Yes.
Second.
Anika, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you, Chris.
Good luck on Friday.
So now we're on to the vote on Citizens Naming Committee membership and chairperson relative to proposal to rename Glendale Elementary School. Jane, did you want to say anything? No? Okay. No.
No, this is just the first step in the process of actually naming or renaming a school in this case. So this committee has been recommended by board members, and will just get us moving along.
All right. So this is part of the process. We have, now we have 16 people who want to serve on the Citizens Naming Committee, which is great. The minimum was 12, so we will have 12 and 4 alternates. These are the names. I'll read them the names to you. Krista Barknecht, Sabrina Madison, Littler Matson, Ashley Lyles, Bernie Hose, Noble Ray, Mary Gilbranson, Michael Tierney, Reuben Anthony, Charles Tubbs, Tanya Buckingham, Mary Nellis, Genya Erling. I'm sorry?
Genya.
Genya Erling. Yes, these are the alternates. Genya Erling, Kristen Johnson, Cheryl Cato, and Holly Markham. All right, so I have appointed Noble Ray as co-chair along with Mary Gilbranson.
That's a separate motion.
Oh, that is a separate motion? Okay.
That'll be the next one.
All right, so it is recommended that the Board of Education approve the 12 members and 4 alternates to the Citizens Naming Committee relative to the proposal to rename Glendale Elementary School as listed on the attachment prepared to the special meeting of the Board of Education dated December 9th, 2019.
Second.
Second.
I
Discussion?
Yeah. Did you say 12 minimum or 12 maximum?
What's the policy say, 12?
It's just
12.
Oh, some
Yeah.
of our policies are like.
I know. Believe me, we talked about that.
We'll have
So,
a chance.
yeah, we'll have a chance.
Yeah, so I hear some names of leaders in the community that may not live in a neighborhood, or that it's their school. So I'm curious if maybe the chair and the co-chair could actually, instead of us picking the alternates, that maybe they can pick their alternates to have a balance in their committee with both community leaders and also parents of the school.
Okay, so I'm going to follow the current policy.
We have to pick alternates?
Yeah.
In the policy?
I'm,
Oh, I thought we did.
I'm picking up.
Now I'm confused.
I'm picking.
We have to pick 12.
We have to pick 12.
We have to pick 12 people.
But we have
according
16.
to policy, but we have had recommended more than 12, and because things happen with people, we are going to have 4 alternates in case there's something that somebody cannot serve
So,
for some reason.
what was your question?
I thought that we could have this, so we could recommend the 16, and then the chair and co-chair would pick who is the 12 and who is the alternate.
Okay.
And to balance.
Yeah.
I
So,
understand.
I'm just gonna follow the board policy. I'm
Yeah,
choosing
and
all of
then they can
them.
all
I'm
decide
choosing 4
it.
alternates. I've identified who the co-chairs are. We can change the policy.
I digress.
Yeah. And you are on policy, so you can do whatever you want. Okay.
So I think this is great, and I know we're on a pretty tight timeline to actually get this done. I wonder, just in the interest of public transparency, if you could just give a quick rundown about, like, once we've appointed this committee, what happens to the point where we actually look at voting to rename the school.
Yes, actually, the superintendent, according to the policy, will then work with the Citizens Naming Committee to set up dates, to get them all the information that they need from, we are now having people make comments on the website. We've had some public comments at meetings, and we'll have one more opportunity for public comments. And so I will work with the group to get their meetings set up and get their timeline going. As it's set right now, they look to have maybe 3 to 4 meetings being done January 8th to bring for discussion on January 13th to the work group their recommended name. And then we'll have discussion there, and then the vote at the January regular board meeting.
Mm-hmm. That's really helpful, and I want to thank everybody who stepped up and offered to be on this committee.
Yeah, it sounded like there was a lot of work done ahead of time. The community just got together, and I think they met a few times already. So this is a formality for the board. Any other questions? Comments? All right. Anika, your advisory role? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Did you hear Kate?
I hear Kate. I did.
You did? Okay. Next is, it is recommended that the Board of Education appoint Noble Ray and Mary Gulbranson to serve as co-chairpersons of the Citizens Naming Committee relative to the proposal to rename Glendale Elementary School. Second? Can I get a
second? A second.
Okay. Anika, your discussion? Okay, Anika, your advisory role?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Okay, Anika, your advisory role. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all for a really good meeting today. Thank you, Kate. Yep. Yeah. Sorry, hey, Chris, I need to.